But we do have an update on the research findings from John and Dave. So, John Friedman, yes. Thank you. And I'd like to sincerely apologize to John and Dave. Dave Deming is a professor of public policy, education, and economics at the Harvard Kennedy School. And John?
And the Harvard Graduate School of Education.
And the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Thank you. And John is an associate professor at Brown University and a co-author on the Mobility Report Cards paper. He is also a former special assistant to the president for economic policy. So if you want to talk to him about the tax bill, he could also tell you what is going to happen there. So the two of them are principal researchers in the Climate Initiative. And I will turn it over to you, John.
Great. Well, James, thank you so much. I knew that presenting in the last slot before lunch was going to be a challenge, but you've raised the bar, James, in terms of making sure we keep you in the room and your stomachs don't draw you out where. So we've heard from so many leaders at all levels of higher education this morning about the challenges that we face and some great ideas about what we can do about them. And so we wanted to now take time to talk about what it is that the Climate Initiative is about, what we're planning to do, and we're going to do that in two pieces. We're going to show you some evidence right now on some early findings with some of our early partners, UT Austin and CUNY. And then we're going to have time later in the afternoon when our co-author Raj Chetty talks with David Coleman, who can take time to lay out some of the broader vision about where we're going with a lot of this. Now, this is a graph that motivates me every day. If we could, let's see, go to the next slide, please. This graph captures, for me, much of what the angst around growth in the United States is about in a very general way. So what we're plotting here is for kids born in each year for about the past 75 years, what's the chance that they grow up to earn more than their parents did? A simple way of capturing the American dream. And what you see over on the left of the chart, for children born 75 years ago, it was a near certainty. More than 90% of those kids grew up to earn more than their parents did. And people might have even talked about the American dream as earning twice as much as their parents did. But over the last 75 years, that has faded, so that by the time the kids who are now entering the labor force are doing so, it's really no better than a coin flip whether they will achieve success by this definition. So this is a great challenge to us all, but it also motivates our work in higher education, in neighborhoods, in elementary and secondary education. Everything that our research team works on is motivated by trying to understand and then find policies to reverse this trend. And so today here, we're gathered with a collective sense that higher education can be an answer to this fading American dream. Higher education, we know, has the potential to increase mobility for kids from all backgrounds. If we go to the next slide, please. The problem is that, as so many of you have mentioned this morning, there are many challenges there as well. It's not just that student success isn't where we want it to be. We've seen in our data that especially at those high mobility rate schools, access has been decreasing over the past 15 years. And so again, this presents a great challenge to us for how, in the space of higher education, we can reverse this trend and help revive the American dream. It's not going to be the only way that we need to revive the American dream, but I think we all have the sense that this is going to be an integral part of any holistic package to do so. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So that's why we formed the Climate Initiative. It's a partnership between researchers and schools to connect data sets so that we can answer the questions we've been talking about this morning with more detail. We want to answer first questions about how we get more talented kids, more kids from all backgrounds, to high mobility rate schools. And we can do that in several different ways. We can identify schools that have high mobility rates. We can identify more students who are diamonds in the rough, who have potential that has yet to be unlocked. We can understand which students and which colleges go together. Rather than just going to whatever school ends up highest on a rank list, we can understand where can each particular student go in order to help maximize their potential. And we can judge that potential, as the previous panel was discussing, not only by short-term measures in college. We can look for the long term. We can look to understand how these students do when they get out of college, when they get into the labor force. Are they economically secure, and are they able to support their families? We can also study what policies are important for improving student success. What policies support student success at those schools which are really successful, and how can we learn from them to improve success at the others? One of the themes of our research has been that we can go beyond the one-size-fits-all solution that I think has been all too common, not just in higher education, but in economics more generally. You have a national data set, you have a national set of solutions, and then you just poured it into all these different places without thought about how exactly that's going to fit. That's why, for Climb, we really wanted to partner with all of you to understand what's going on in each place, to tailor policy solutions to not just the particular situation on the ground in terms of details of implementation, but to really understand what are the problems that need to be addressed on each campus, and how do they differ from problems on another campus, even if they look similar in some aggregate data. David Leonhardt likes to say, when we work with him, that the key is letting people look themselves up in the data. And I think that, more broadly, the way in which we can tailor our statistics and tailor eventually these policy recommendations to schools is a critical way to connect with people in their own communities, in their own institutions, to understand exactly what's going on. And so that's why it's so important to us that so many of you have joined us here today. This is a map showing what are now 200 colleges who have joined us as part of the Climb partnership. I just want to give everyone a round of applause. These schools are sharing data with us so that we can create the most comprehensive data set on issues in higher education, going from before kids are in college with a detailed picture of what happens during the application process, what happens when they enroll in school, and then what happens once they leave school. And these partners, together with the College Board, which provide a broad set of data on students across lots of different institutions, are going to help us actualize that goal of understanding broadly what policies work, in what circumstances do they work, in combination with what other policies do they work, but then in each specific institution, what are the problems that we see? And how can we then tailor those policy solutions to address those particular problems? So as I said, today we're going to have two different opportunities to engage with the Climb Initiative. Right now, at this talk, next slide please, we are going to present a set of data vignettes, very quick results, just the tip of the iceberg to give you a sense of the great potential of this new data set, of this partnership that we are kicking off today. And we're going to talk about two different issues. Specifically, we're going to talk about increasing access by looking at how low-income and racial minority students fare after arriving on campus. And we're going to talk about promoting success by looking at the impacts of programs designed to help low-income students. Now, we're going to do that using data from early partners, and that's the University of Texas at Austin and CUNY. Next slide, please. We've gotten data, as many of you are giving us, these early partners to provide us data on more than 200,000 students who have attended the University of Texas at Austin over the past 20 years. And then we have data on 1.2 million applicants and more than 700,000 attendees of CUNY across all schools in the campus. And we're going to combine those data with data from federal records to give us a sense of where they're coming from and where they're going. And most importantly, we'll be able to look at not just, again, how they do in college, but what are their wage earnings after they leave college to give us a real sense of how things look, not just 5, but 10 years often after they leave school. So I'm going to do the first part on increasing access using the UT data, and then I'll turn it over to my co-author, Dave Deming, who's going to talk about promoting success in the CUNY data. In UT, slide forward, please. What we're going to do is focus on students who have arrived on campus and then look to see what are the disparities across different students from different disadvantaged backgrounds relative to their advantaged peers. This is a critical input into thinking about policies that seek to increase access of these types of students. If the students, as I will show you, are doing surprisingly well, especially in the long run, we don't need to be admitting these students as a favor. We need to be admitting these students because they have the potential to succeed when put in the right environment. And so I think the data we're going to show you will help generally address the potential gains from these types of policies, but also will connect with the discussion we were having on the previous panel about race and income and how they relate, at least in this particular context. Next slide, please. So just to start, what we've done is taken all the students who enrolled at UT, and we've split them by the income of the families that they're coming from. And we've split them into 5 quintiles using the national distribution of income for families with other kids of the same age, whether they went to college or not. So then what this bar shows is for students coming from families with less than $25,000 worth of income per year, so those are families in the bottom 20% nationally with students in these cohorts, the average person who enrolls at UT, and this is just enrollees, we are not looking only at graduates, but everyone who comes in the door, once they get into their 30s, we see them earning, on average, at the 68th percentile. That means that relative to all other kids born in the same year, they earn more than 68% of them. And just to give you a sense, that's earning, in fact, about $68,000. Now, that is unbelievably good compared to the average student from a poor family in the US that earns more like at the 35th percentile. That is, poor students at UT earn more than 68% of their peers. The average student from these type of families earns less than 68% of their peers. But what I think is also impressive, right, it's not surprising that students that come to UT are excellent. If we then go one slide forward and compare these students from poor families with students from other types of families going up the income ladder, there are small gaps, but they're not large gaps. So looking at income in their 30s, taking kids from the richest families, those families that earn more than $110,000 on average, they're just earning at the 72nd percentile. That's about $78,000. And so across the income distribution, UT is leveling the playing field in taking these kids who generally do not do well and almost bringing them up to the level of their much richer peers. Go to the next slide, please. We can also show the same thing looking across different racial and ethnic groups. Here again, we see white students on average are earning right about the 70th percentile. That's about $74,000. Students from Hispanic families and black families, not Hispanic, are earning just $70,000 and $69,000. It's a little bit less, but again, compared with the vast racial income gaps in the US, students coming out of UT are remarkably similar across these different backgrounds. And what's in fact even more striking here is if you correct for the fact, you adjust for the fact that students from these minority families are also coming from families with less income. They're coming from schools that are lower quality. If you adjust for those differences, one slide forward, please. Adjusting for these differences, students of color actually outperform white students coming out of UT. That is a striking statement about the contribution of UT to the upward mobility of students from these different types of families. And these are data from 15 years ago, right? Because we had to wait until these students got into their 30s in order to measure incomes. We are so excited to see what are the impacts of all the reforms that President Fenves has been undertaking more recently. A final note, and this is something that's come up in various different contexts today, looking in our data, it's very important to understand these gaps, to look not just in the short term, right after students arrive on campus, and even looking at graduation gives a misleading picture relative to the convergence that we see in the long run. So I've just showed you that students of color are earning just about $5,000 less once they get out into the labor force. That's relative to much larger gaps in achievement along the way. So 58% of white students, as opposed to just 46% of students of color, have above median GPAs in the first 2 years while they're in school here. The graduation rate is also significantly higher for white students, and this is whether you ever graduate. We've heard about some of the gaps that would be even larger if we were to look only at four-year graduation. But those gaps notwithstanding, we see that once they get out into the labor force, these students are doing very well. And that is an example of how we hope these data can give confidence to, for instance, the programs here that are increasing access for students from disadvantaged families. We see over the past 15 years that in our data, the fraction of students from the poorest quintile of families at UT has gone up by 33%. And these data suggest that, in fact, that's a great thing because those students are performing very well coming out of here. So let me now turn it over to Dave, who's going to present on results from CUNY.
Great. Thank you, John. One slide forward. Thank you all for being here today. I'm thrilled and really honored to be here to talk to you about promoting success in CUNY. And the first thing I want to say before digging into the results is one of the really exciting things about CLIMB, about this partnership between researchers and institutions, is that the scale of it allows us to look at particular programs in particular schools and to look at particular students in a way that just wasn't previously possible. So if you look at past work on the area of higher education and mobility, it's typically either a detailed look in a small set of institutions, maybe one college or a system, or it's administrative data covering people all over the country, but it's a few students in a few schools in a way that doesn't really allow you to dig into details and to look at particular programs. Slide forward, please. And so one thing that I want to talk about today is sort of one example in one college of our ability with this partnership to do this kind of work, to really understand, get under the hood of what's happening in colleges, and to understand what are the things that certain colleges are doing for certain students that are increasing mobility. If some colleges are engines of mobility, why? And is it connected to particular things that they're doing? And so today I'm going to talk about one program, which is a program called SEEK at CUNY. It stands for Search for Education, Elevation, and Knowledge. It's a program whose structure should be familiar to many of you because it's essentially what sometimes people call a college opportunity program. So it's a college that takes low-income students and admits them to the college, and these are students who wouldn't otherwise be able to obtain admission to the college, and then offers them some additional supports once they arrive on campus, including financial support, but also more attention academically to try to generate more economic mobility. And so I want to emphasize, while I'm showing you some early results from the SEEK program, many of you guys across the country have programs like this on your own campuses, and so we think this is just kind of a taste of what's to come, hopefully. So the SEEK program, just to give you a sense, it's been around for over 40 years. It has served cumulatively over 250,000 students, and it is now currently operating in about 11 CUNY four-year campuses. Just kind of to give you a sense of how it works, so one thing is how do students get in, how are they eligible? There's really two things that are important for our purposes today. One is that admission to all CUNY schools is determined by something called an academic index, which is calculated based on a student's grade point average, high school grade point average, their SAT scores, their course taking, and a variety of other things. They're all kind of summed into a number, and admissions at CUNY is sort of by program, by year, by campus, determined based on that academic index. So you put everything together, you say how ready is a student for school, and then you more or less admit students based on their score. And so students who are just above can get in, and students who are just below do not get in. And so of course it's much more complicated than that, but that's the general idea. And so what CUNY does is they say you have to be above this cutoff to be admitted to a four-year CUNY campus. And so in the SEEK program, what they're doing for students, they're saying we also have an income cutoff to be eligible for SEEK. And this income cutoff varies by year and family size, but to give you a sense, it's about $45,000 in 2016 for a family of 4. So these are relatively poor students. And the SEEK program allows students who are below the academic index cutoff to be admitted to a CUNY campus despite being below that cutoff. So it's like saying, look, if there's low-income students, we're going to admit students even though they don't normally meet the admissions requirements, and we're going to give them some support once they get to campus. So the support, there's a variety of things. The CUNY folks could probably say a lot more about this than I can, but just to give you a sense, some of the things the program does are a 6-week summer program prior to entry to get students prepared for matriculation in the fall, some kind of individual and small group tutoring for students, and then also access to special opportunity counselors, which are essentially guidance counselors with much smaller than normal caseloads so they can give these students the attention they need. And the final thing is, while many of these students are on federal financial aid, SEEK does provide some additional funds for living expenses and books and things like that. Okay? And so to try to understand the impacts of SEEK on student incomes later in life, we want to compare them to 2 different groups. All right? And we're going to compare them along 2 dimensions. First, we want to get a sense of how SEEK students compare coming in, and then we want to look at outcomes. Okay, so in terms of how they compare coming in, you can see on the first set of bars here, SEEK students come from families that earn about $27,000 a year on average. That's in about the 20th percentile of the family income distribution, so these are relatively poor students, which makes sense given the eligibility requirements. And they have SAT scores that are about 805 on average. Okay, so the first group we want to compare them to, this is control group 1, are students who are higher income and who are not admitted to CUNY because they don't get the boost that SEEK gives. So essentially, these are students who, if they were below the income cutoff, would probably be admitted to SEEK, but because they come from higher income families, they are not admitted to a CUNY 4-year school. And so many of them will go to other 4-year schools, or they'll go to a CUNY 2-year school. Okay, so this is families with, so the thing to notice is that SEEK students and higher income students have similar SAT scores, but the higher income students have family incomes that are about 3 times higher. So again, it's higher income, similar levels of preparation. And then the second control group is students who are low income, so you can see they have the same family incomes as the SEEK students, but they have much higher levels of academic preparation, and so they were admitted based on the regular CUNY admissions requirements. So they had a high enough academic index to be admitted. They didn't need the boost given by SEEK, and therefore they are not in the SEEK program. They're admitted through the regular process. And you should think about that comparison as really like an upper bound of the impact of SEEK, because if you thought that the reason why these students might be successful was because CUNY is very good at finding diamonds in the rough in the New York City area, maybe these are families, immigrant families and so on, you would think that would also apply to this other group, because these are students who don't even need the boost, right? They get in regularly. And so if you compare these two and they do similarly, then it really suggests that there's something about the SEEK program itself that is leading to better outcomes. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so all right, so now this is what y'all came for. First, let's look at earnings. This is earnings for SEEK students between the ages of 26 and 34. So SEEK students in these cohorts earn about $50,000 a year on average, and that is in the 57th percentile of the income distribution. So they are doing better than the national average, and these are students coming from poor families. I don't know about you, but $50,000 a year when I'm 26 years old, I would have taken that any day, so that seems like they're doing pretty well. So let's look at the second group. So these are higher income students with similar, in fact, 15 points higher SAT scores, and their family incomes are 3 times higher. So $77,000 instead of $27,000, and same SAT scores. And their incomes between the ages of 26 and 34 are lower than the incomes of the SEEK students. So let me say that again. So these are students who come from families who are earning 3 times as much, and they have SAT scores that are 15 points higher, and they're earning $4,000 less between the ages of 26 and 34 than the students from low-income families who are enrolled in SEEK. Okay. Now the second control group, this is kind of the lower bound, these are students who, again, equally poor, but have SAT scores that are about 100 points higher. And they are earning the same amount of money as the SEEK students. Exactly the same. So how should we think about this? Well, for sure it's true, based on this comparison, that SEEK students are doing much better than what you would predict based on their income, their family income, and their SAT scores. If you want to think about how much is SEEK worth, it's sort of like saying, in terms of predicted future income, comparing groups 1 and 3, SEEK is worth about 100 SAT points, right? Because these students are scoring 100 points higher and they're doing exactly the same, and they have the same family income. So next slide. So what are the lessons from this? Well, any way you slice it, students in SEEK are doing extraordinarily well compared to their peers. So they're doing better than peers with similar levels of preparation but higher income. And they're doing as well as students with much higher levels of preparation and similar income. Okay. So this is not the final word on the SEEK program. And as I said, this is only one program in one school. We hope this is really just the beginning of our ability and together to explore the impacts of programs all across the country on things like this. Go ahead. And so going forward, just to give you a sense, working with the CUNY folks in particular, but hopefully eventually working with all of you, we want to understand what aspects of SEEK are responsible for its success. So is there variation across campuses and over time in the level of academic support that's provided? Is it the tutoring? Is it the financial support, et cetera? Those are things we hope to dig into. And then also, what types of students are benefiting? Is it students of color? Is it girls versus boys? Is it particular types of programs? And then kind of going forward, what can we learn about that we can kind of target differently, scale up to other places, and can we make this part of a workable solution for increasing economic mobility in America? So I just want to emphasize that I'm really excited that you guys are all here. I'm really excited to be a part of doing this together. I think this is really just the beginning of something great that's to come. I really do believe that. So thanks very much. With that, we'll take some questions. Why don't we take the microphone and pass it? Yes, Tamar.
So amazing presentation, so encouraging. The slide that sort of baffled me was the slide that showed the disparity in grade point average, the disparity in graduation rates, and then the not very much disparity in earnings outcomes later. How the heck do you explain that?
Yeah, thanks. That's, I mean, it was a finding that really struck me as well. And I think that, sure, sorry, the question was about the finding that the disparities we find in later life earnings are much smaller than the disparities we find in academic performance and achievement while on campus as measured by GPA and graduation rates. And I think that was very surprising to me as well. But I think that as a researcher, what I've learned is that I just need to be kind of humble in front of the data. And I think, obviously we all agree that, having somebody graduate is better than not having them graduate, but that sometimes these different intermediate outcomes may not be the best signal of what's going to happen in the long term, right? There can be people who graduate, but without skills to lead them to economic security. And there can be people who accrue an enormous amount of skill in, say, 3.5 years on campus, but we all know the barriers that some of these students face where, they might not quite get across the finish line. They may get across the finish line at another institution, but if they've gained a lot from being on campus at UT for 3 years, then that's something which they can take with them forever. And so one of the projects that we're undertaking is to try to let the data tell us what are the right short-term measures to proxy for long-term success. And my sense is that it's not going to be something that's totally foreign, but it's probably going to be, not quite graduation, but graduation in this nuanced way. And we just want to, let the data speak, and then hopefully we can use that to not just evaluate changes that happened 15 years ago, but understand in real time how things are going. And I know, telling a university administrator that, you're so happy that they put this change into place, we'll look forward to coming back 20, 25 years from now and understanding whether it worked or not. I'm an academic, but I'm not that naive, and so we really want to make this something that we can put into practice in real time to help people understand after just 3, 4, 5 years how these changes are going.
Just very quickly, on the SAT, I've never had the ability to have the sample size that you do, but certainly in limited sample, we never see enough predictive power on a point-by-point basis to be used in the SAT at 100 points to be determining differences in labor market outcomes. So you might want to include a slide to show where does it start to make a difference? Is it 100 points? Is it 200 points? Whatever, and that might help on that academic preparation process.
That's very helpful to you.
Yeah, I think I think underlying the question is what is the kind of overall relationship between SAT score and income, and what does that have to do? What does that say about what colleges are or not doing? And I think first thing to say is, with this partnership, we're going to be able to look at this data in a level of detail that was not previously possible. So 3.5 million students, SAT scores for many of them. And when you've got a lot of data, it's easy to detect small relationships between one thing and the other. I think more generally, though, the question is really about, why is it that, let's say, students who look like they're behind initially can catch up? And is it, what does it say about the relationship between prior preparation and success? My sense, and this also speaks to Tamar's question, is, when you make an effort to reach out and help students who, don't have the highest SAT scores or not as prepared, it's not surprising that it would take them some time. If you talk to anybody who's a first-generation college student, they're going to tell you, I got to college, I was overwhelmed, I don't know what's going on. And so it may be that, and actually, students from higher income families, if they don't go to, let's say, as good of a college, they have other ways to kind of fall into the safety net of their family. And so I think it just could be that it takes time for some of these impacts to emerge. And so this gradient between SAT score and income is not so obvious because people's experiences are very different, especially for students who don't, who are first generation or what have you.
In the back, I think, next.
First of all, thank you for this. Extraordinarily important. Just a technical
It wouldn't be possible without all of you guys.
A technical question. You're looking at age 26. Have you sorted out the students who are in graduate school? And are more of them the students with the high SAT so that their income is lower than it would be otherwise?
Yeah, so just a clarification. So it's not. So it's ages between ages of 26 and 34. So we've got a lot of students who are in their early 30s when maybe that's less of an issue. I think there are some things we can do to look at graduate school. That's sort of an area for future work. I think that's definitely a big part of what's happening for many students. I don't happen to know offhand how common it is for the students in the CUNY sample to have gone to graduate school. I don't think it's that common, but it's something that we are definitely going to do with the project going forward.
Yeah, I was going to say more generally, I think whenever we look at wages as an outcome, we need to do so and make sure that we're actually capturing some long-term effect and not just some short-term thing. So, if you look at students at, say, age 22, you'll often find that students from much, much worse schools, even those that don't go to school, are out-earning those that are in school because those that are in school are in school. And by the time it takes people to go through graduate programs or kind of get into their careers, what we found is that for students at most four-year schools, once you get into the late 20s, things pretty much stabilize. And then even for much more selective schools like at UT, once you get over 30, things really tend to stabilize. And so that's part of why we're really trying to go out that far. And I know there's been a lot of debate in the context of accountability systems or other statistics about, do we use the first job or do we use something else? And we think it's really important to get a few years out to get a full picture of what the value of these students are getting from the education.
You have a very impressive collection of institutions that you're going to be gathering data from. Can you talk a little bit about the criteria that you use for selection and what's missing? What are you missing?
We're a big tent. I think it's not so much that we selected institutions. It's more that, it's taken. We've been at this for 9 months or something, and it's sort of trying to work with as many of you guys as we can. And so we kind of started with some big systems and some connections we had, but we would like to build this out as much as we possibly could. We are not discriminating. We want to work on issues of community colleges, kind of regional public schools, flagships, elite private school, everything. So I think that's our goal is to paint the most comprehensive picture possible of economic mobility and to be able to speak to things that are happening at all levels, because as you all know, the issues are quite distinct.
Let's take one more question, and I want to make sure we all get to lunch.
Yeah.
Go ahead back there. I'm looking to a light. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
First question. First, let me compliment you. These programs are changing lives, and so it's refreshing to see a data-driven, long-view highlighting these programs.
Thank you very much.
I will tell you, though, having grown up in corporate America, the question I would have when you look at the slide that you showed about 50,000 and 6,000, the question is, do these students have the skills that allow for, have they already passed out? Or is there something else that say they repeat while others are maybe taking other jobs that they have longer views on getting further ahead? So the long view, I think, is really important. We want to make sure that changing the lives is a
Yeah, so that's a great point, and I think that it's important to emphasize that when we talk about earning an extra $4,000 at age 30, what that is it's going to be a gap that's going to continue to grow. And when we say things stabilize, what we mean is that things stabilize kind of in a distributional sense. That that's why we often use ranks, because where you are in the distribution at age 30 on average tends to be pretty predictive of where you are later on, but that distribution is stretching out and out as students go through their careers. And so what's a $4,000 gap at age 30 might be a $6,000 gap at age 40, it's a $10,000 age gap by the time they retire. And so when you accumulate this up, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars of extra earnings, extra contribution, extra money for their families that they're earning. And of course, within that, there's still a great distribution of students. There are students who are at absolutely top, the kind of most selective jobs. There are students who are not doing so well. But I think one of the ways in which these data really let us dig in is by being able to say something about all of these different students, and whether they're in state, whether they're secondary earners at home with kids, whether they're single parents trying to support their families. We can look really in detail at each of these circumstances and understand the impact that these programs are really having on people's lives over time.
If I may, just quickly, just stepping back a little bit, I think we do want to look at the long run. We do want to know that these things are sustained. At the same time, if you told me we've got a program that can take students who come from families earning about $27,000 and then by their late 20s and early 30s, they themselves are going to be earning $50,000, I'll take that every day of the week, because that is a life-changing impact. It really is. These are students who, not all of them are going to end up, being in the middle class, but $50,000 at that age is a very, very, very strong predictor of doing well later in life. And so I think, we got to find the secret sauce. I mean, again, it's just, it's not the final word. It's one program. But we're just hoping that this work and working with all of you guys can really, generate more results like that. I think it'd be a really hopeful story for all involved, and we're excited about it.